You know, Ron, I'm writing a book, have written a book talking about the future of the conservative movement, and I tried to go back to figure out when the big mess began that led to this collapse. And there were a few people, Peter Walson at AEI, and even the New York Times article that was written in 1999 warning about Freddie and Fannie. A lot of warnings out there. Alan Greenspan also issued warnings. But I was stunned by reading a statement you made in the Banking Committee on September 10th, 2003. In fact, I reprinted the whole thing in my book. I want Americans who hear leaders saying every day, we could have never seen this coming. This was a shock. How did this happen? I want to read what you said 5 years before the collapse. The special privileges granted to Fannie and Freddie have distorted the housing market by allowing them to attract capital that they could not attract under pure market conditions. Like all artificially created bubbles, the boom in housing prices cannot last forever. When housing prices fall, homeowners will experience difficulty as their equity is wiped out. Furthermore, the holders of the mortgage debt will also have a loss. These losses will be greater than they would have otherwise been had government policy not actively encouraged overinvesting in housing. And you go on to say, because so many people will invest in housing, the damage will be catastrophic. Congressman, how could it be that you knew this on the Banking Committee in 2003 and nobody else did until after the collapse?
Well, I would think the easiest explanation is Washington, D.C. is permeated by Keynesian economic thinking. Very few even know the name Austrian economics and understand the business cycle. The Federal Reserve credit created during the last 8 months has not stimulated economic growth in technology or the industrial section, but a lot of it ended up in the expanding real estate bubble, churned by the $3.2 trillion of debt maintained by the GSEs, the government-sponsored agents, enterprises. The GSEs, made up of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Bank, have managed to keep the housing market afloat, in contrast to the more logical slowdown in hotel and office construction. Instead of the newly inflated money being directed toward the stock market, it now finds its way into the rapidly expanding real estate bubble. This too will burst, as all bubbles do. A lot of concern now has been expressed about the collapsing of this housing bubble. It's a shame that we had not talked about this 10 or 15 years ago, when many free market economists predicted it would come and worried about it and wished we could have prevented it. But the irony of all this now is that everything that caused the financial bubble, the housing bubble, we're resorting to doing the same thing. You can't solve the problem of inflation with inflation. The debasement of the currency, which is a continual process, is the reason we get financial problems and financial bubbles. Whether it was in the 1920s or the NASDAQ bubble or the housing bubble, we have to deal with the cause. We're dealing, and we talk so much about our solutions, but nobody's talking about the cause. And the cause literally is the excessive credit created by the Federal Reserve System, and we can't deny this.
Our national security is more jeopardized by permitting this to happen, because we're liable to start a war. We're liable to have our military men killed. We're liable to have more attacks on us by terrorists.
Our foolish policy in Iraq invites terrorist attacks against U.S. territory and incites the Islamic fundamentalists against us. Our foreign policy of military interventionism has brought us death and destruction to many foreign lands and loss of life for many Americans. From Korea and Vietnam to Serbia, Iran, Iraq, and now Afghanistan, we have ventured far from our shores in search of wars to fight. There is no evidence that this policy serves the interests of world peace. It certainly increases the danger to all Americans as we become the #1 target of terrorists. Our arrogant policy and attitude of superiority will continue to elicit a smoldering hatred toward us, and out of sheer frustration will motivate even more terrorist attacks against us.
Mr. Speaker, Our government intervention in the economy, the private affairs of citizens, and the internal affairs of foreign countries leads to uncertainty and many unintended consequences. Here are some of the consequences about which we should be concerned. I predict U.S. taxpayers will pay to rebuild Palestine, both the West Bank and the Gaza, as well as Afghanistan. U.S. taxpayers paid to bomb these areas, so we will be expected to rebuild them. Peace of sorts will come to the Middle East, but will be short-lived. There will be big promises of more U.S. money and weapons flowing to Israel and to Arab countries allied with the United States. U.S. troops and others will be used to monitor the peace. In time, an oil boycott will be imposed, with oil prices soaring to historic highs. Current Israeli-United States policies will solidify Arab Muslim nations in their effort to avenge the humiliation of the Palestinians. This will include those Muslim nations that in the past have fought against each other. Some of our moderate Arab allies will be overthrown by Islamic fundamentalists. The UN will continue to condemn through resolutions Israeli-U.S. policies in the Middle East, and they will be ignored. Some European countries will clandestinely support the Muslim countries and their anti-Israel pursuits. China, ironically assisted by American aid, much more openly will sell the militant Muslims the weapons they want and will align herself with the Arab nations. The United States, with Tony Blair as head cheerleader, will attack Iraq without proper authority, and a major war, the largest since World War II, will result. Major moves will be made by China, India, Russia, and Pakistan in Central Asia to take advantage of the chaos for the purpose of grabbing land, resources, and strategic advantages sought after for years. The Karzai government will fail, and U.S. military presence will end in Afghanistan. An international dollar crisis will dramatically boost interest rates in the United States. Price inflation with a major economic downturn will decimate U.S. federal government finances and exploding deficits and uncontrolled spending. Federal Reserve policy will continue at an expanding rate with massive credit expansion, which will make the dollar crisis worse. Gold will be seen as an alternative to paper money as it returns to its historic role as money. Erosion of civil liberties here at home will continue as our government responds to political fear in dealing with the terrorist threat by making generous use of the powers obtained with the Patriot Act. Many American military personnel and civilians will be killed in the coming conflict. The leaders of whichever side loses the war will be hauled into and tried before the International Criminal Court for war crimes. The United States will lose the war, but neither will we win. Our military and political leaders will not be tried by the International Criminal Court. The Congress and the President will shift radically toward expanding the size and scope of the federal government. This will satisfy both the liberals and the conservatives. Military and police powers will grow, satisfying the conservatives. The welfare state, both domestic and international, will expand, satisfying the liberals. Both sides will endorse military adventurism overseas. This is the most important of my predictions. Policy changes could prevent all of the previous predictions from occurring. Unfortunately, that will not occur. In due course, the Constitution will continue to be steadily undermined and the American Republic further weakened. During the next decade, the American people will become poorer and less free, while they become more dependent on the government for economic security. The war will prove to be divisive, with emotions and hatred growing between the various factions and special interests that drive our policies in the Middle East. Agitation from more class warfare will succeed in dividing us domestically. And believe it or not, I expect lobbyists will thrive more than ever during the dangerous period of chaos. I have no timetable for these predictions, but just in case, keep them around and look at them in 5 to 10 years. Let's hope and pray that I'm wrong on all accounts. If so, I will be very pleased.
The gentleman has expired.